Hello, everybody. I was just reminded 10 seconds ago how important it is to check my audio settings before I go live so that I don't have to fish around and panic and so on. So welcome, everybody. It's good to see you. Gen X Music Rules, long time no see. It is good to have you back. Thank you for being here. So before we get started with the main topic of today, I'm sure that all of you have heard by now that the governor's mansion in Pennsylvania was firebombed by a lunatic. A man named Cody Balmer broke into the governor's mansion on the first night of Passover and threw Molotov cocktails in, created quite a bit of havoc, and made it clear that he was there to create as much damage as possible. He brought a hammer and said that if he had run into Governor Shapiro, that he would have killed him with that hammer that he brought to the governor's mansion. I am not surprised by this at all. I'm actually surprised that it took this long, not necessarily targeting Shapiro, but just in general. It is no surprise and no secret that the pro-Palestinian movement has attracted a fair number of mentally ill, deeply damaged, violent people. And these are the same people who are being protected by the universities. These are the same people who have been allowed to go through the streets for a year and a half threatening Jews, Jewish businesses, and so on. And Governor Shapiro, being a Jewish governor, was obviously a huge target, which is why I am so grateful that he decided not to accept any offer of being on the ticket with Kamala Harris, because he would have been a huge target, probably one of the biggest targets on the campaign trail. And her humiliating loss would have been blamed on him, no doubt. So all that I can say is that if you are a Jew living in the United States and you are not deeply afraid at the moment, then you're not paying attention, and you haven't been since October 7th. Even if you are presumably on the right side, even if you espouse all the beliefs that you think would hold you in great favor, you will always be a target. Always. You will always be held in suspicion. Look at Ethan Klein. What a good example he is of exactly what it is that I'm talking about. So thank God the Shapiros are okay. Thank God nobody was killed. Thank God that nobody was harmed. But again, maybe it's just my cynical worldview, but I am not surprised that this happened. And I'm just grateful that everybody came out the other side alive. Thank God. So anyway, we are going to get on to the main event. We have finally had some good news out of the United Kingdom. All the news out of the UK has been bad in terms of free speech, in terms of the immigration courts, in terms of bringing the individuals who ran the grooming gangs to justice, including all of it. I mean, all of the above, and I've been talking about all of these topics at length on my channel for quite some time. And I had kind of lost hope until today, when we got some great news out of the United Kingdom. So I'm going to fire up these videos. It's a great day for women. It's a great day for the gay community. It's a great day for lesbians. And finally, some sanity has been restored to the United Kingdom. Finally. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these stories on the British TV. And we are going to celebrate together. My greatest regret, I agree with Graham Linehan, who tweeted out that If only Magdalene Burns were alive to see this. It's a shame that she is not alive to see this day. But better late than never. All that work that she did years ago has come to great fruition. So let's take a look at this and let's hear some of these arguments.
The world had gone mad if somebody had said to you, even 10 years ago, oh, did you know there's going to be a court case? Oh, what's it about? What, bank robbery or something? No. Libel? No. They're going to define what a woman is. Really? Get out of here. What do you mean they're going to they need a court case to define what a woman is? And that's what happened today. The court said, look, it's not a victory for one side or the other, or shouldn't be seen in that kind of way. But they did conclude, and there's no doubt about this, this was the ruling: transgender women are not legally women under UK law. The ruling defines women based on biological sex, not gender identity or self-ID.
Thank God.
And of course, this follows the battle between For Women's Scotland and the Scottish Government, with campaigners calling it a victory for common sense. In a moment, we'll be speaking to Peter Tatchell. Bev Jackson's going to be with us too, but let's have a reminder of Lord Hodge this morning delivering the verdict.
Yeah, can we please do a little silent tribute to the great, dearly departed Magdalene Burns? The sacrifices that she made, the amount of abuse that she had to tolerate both when she was alive and after her death, were just grotesque and totally out of proportion to what it was that she was trying to get across. Magdalene Burns was a great campaigner, a true feminist, a great defender of the lesbian community, a great woman. One of the only people I can think of on YouTube or on any social media platform who has actually had a profound impact on my life and influenced me to go forward and speak out. And Magdalene, this is your victory as much as it is for Women's Scotland. Had it not been for you, I think that a lot of other women would have been afraid to speak out. A lot of lesbians would have been afraid to speak out. And you, madam, you started a fire that was that sort of escalated, and now we have finally come to this day. Finally, at long last. Thank you, Magdalene, for everything that you did.
The central question on this appeal is the meaning of the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010. Do those terms refer to biological women or biological sex? Or is a woman to be interpreted as extending to a trans woman with a gender recognition certificate? By that I mean a person born male who now possesses a gender recognition certificate amending her gender to female. The unanimous decision of this court is that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex.
Can we please just take a moment to take that in? Can we take that in? I am so happy today. And believe me, I've had nothing but grim news for the past couple of weeks related to my health, really. And I am celebrating this right now. I'm celebrating it because actually the verdict was quite balanced. But to finally have an official body step forward and say that sex in the Equality Act refers to biological women. Thank fucking God. Thank fucking God. It's about goddamn time. Let's continue.
Let's first speak with Bev Jackson, co-founder of the LGB Alliance. Afternoon to you, Bev. Your reaction to this ruling this morning?
Yeah, lovely to see you, Ian, and thanks for having me on. And obviously, we're just incredibly pleased with this decision. And I really want to pay tribute for Women Scotland, who have fought and fought and fought for years. They're all volunteers. They've just been fighting because it's so important for the women of Scotland, for the women of the UK. And I think that this will reverberate around the world. But we intervened, LGBT Alliance and a number of lesbian groups, because of the rights of lesbians, which are constantly overlooked.
Absolutely.
And I think you'll find that all the articles about this coming up, they ignored the fact of lesbian rights. But it was really important when we saw in the court these judges grappling with the absurdity that a straight man, a heterosexual man who does not possess a gender recognition certificate is a heterosexual man, but once he's got that piece of paper, he becomes a lesbian. And you could see the judges thinking, this makes no sense.
Thank you, Rosie.
And that's why throughout their ruling, they talk about a coherent interpretation of the law. The law has to make sense. And sexual orientation, whether you're attracted to men or to women, is about biology. It's about biological sex. Of course it is. It is. Nobody's attracted to a piece of paper.
Exactly.
It was a complete nonsense. And although I understand the Supreme Court saying that it isn't a victory, it is, of course, a victory for those whose rights have been ignored. This is not about trans rights. It's about women's rights, and it's about lesbian rights, which is a sort of double of women's rights, isn't it? It's about women defining themselves and who we're attracted to.
And it did.
And throughout this whole sordid ordeal, I've said this 1,000 times, so this is the 1,001st time that I'm going to say it. It's lesbians who have really been bearing the brunt of this. Of course, it's mostly women in general, women who have been dragged out of their homes, women who have been fired, women who have been threatened, women who have been dogpiled, women who have been ostracized. But really, within the gay community, it's lesbians who have been targeted by this movement, by heterosexual men who self-identify as women. And lesbians have said no sale, and lesbians are the ones who have gotten it the most, who have been punished the most in terms of private spaces, personal spaces, in terms of saying that they are free to choose with whom they couple up with, whom they are attracted to. And when lesbians say over and over again, we are not attracted to men, we do not want to be interested in men, we are not interested in men, we're not attracted to men, and to then be accused of having some sort of a phobia or being a bigot because you have closed off your, let's say, possibilities to having a relationship with a man who claims to be a woman. God damn it, how many times do we have to say this? Leave lesbians alone. Leave lesbians alone. Enough is enough. Let's continue.
I went through this at the beginning, and I talked, you and I, Bev, have spoken many times over the years on this issue, but what's to me still confusing, this was not an issue up until about half an hour ago, it seems. I've done this job for a couple of decades. You've worked in your field of campaigning and profile for a long, long time too. It never came up. It just never came up. It only really came up, I sense, was when not trans people who decide to live their life under a different name and a different sex from the one they were born with, who weren't harming anybody, weren't advocating any special treatment, etc. It seemed to be this kind of gender evangelism that threw it up. As you rightly say, a bloke with a beard suddenly says, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to become a lesbian. Now, sorry, no, that ain't happening, mate. And it was things like that and various, fairly high-profile people sometimes saying you can be whatever you want to be. And if you've got a beard and a penis and want to call yourself a woman, you have the right to do so, and the law of the land and all institutions should change to accommodate your identity.
Yes, well, I mean, you've got Peter Tatchell coming on in a minute, and he's going to talk about the rights of people who call themselves the opposite sex. But the fact is that that lesbians' rights have been ignored
Absolutely.
throughout. And that is why Kate Harris and I set up LGBT Alliance. Really, it was the main reason in 2019. We tried to get Stonewall to understand that when they changed from talking about the rights of gays and lesbians, same sex,
Right.
to talking about the rights of people who think they're the opposite sex, say same gender, they were making a nonsense of sexual orientation. Sexual orientation isn't about gender, someone who thinks they're the opposite
Not
sex.
at all.
That's not what sexual orientation is. It's completely mad. And in fact, if you ask heterosexual people, if if a man who's heterosexual falls for a woman because it's a man but who calls themselves a woman, they will think it's ridiculous because straight people don't have to deal with that. It's lesbians mostly
Right.
who've had to deal with this, and we're really sick and tired of it. And that is why I feel really, I think you can hear it in my voice, I feel really emotional about this. We have been fighting this for so long. We have been ignored. We have been invisible. And it's really a tremendous, it's above all, it's a relief to see that the Supreme Court understood. And they said that for lesbians to have to accept men who call themselves lesbians into their spaces and into their activities is an assault on their autonomy and dignity. And
I'm really glad that you brought that up, Zarfax, because my friend Clive tweeted today that he is hoping that this ruling has an equal impact on gay men. Having these girlies pop up in gay bars claiming to be male and hurling around the F-got slur at men in the bar. It's not, look, I'm not going to downplay it. I'm not going to say that it's not important or that it's not a big deal. But gay men have also felt the impact of this in saunas, in gay bars, in other places that are supposed to be safe spaces for gay men to interact with one another, meet each other. And for these women to then invade these spaces claiming to be men and feeling that they then have the right to hurl slurs around when they haven't earned that right. They are women, they are female, and they need to come to grips with the fact that gay men are not going to be attracted to them because they're missing a crucial piece of equipment that gay men are absolutely, gay men have the right to make the same choices that lesbians do. Free of judgment and free of insults and slurs and smears, So we'll see. We'll see what happens, but it's a good day. It's a really, really good day for the gay community, for women and for the gay community. So let's continue.
it was such a relief to read those words. I can't tell you.
I tell you, and it got to really weird sort of areas, didn't it? I think, again, we talked about this before. If I decided that I was a woman, but I wasn't a straight woman, I was a lesbian, and you decided, Bev, that you would never date me, then that would make you a wicked transphobe.
Right.
Despite the fact that my anatomical makeup remains that of a male, you would be transphobic for not you wouldn't have to date me, but for not recognizing that I was dateable. That would make you the bad person.
From how difficult it is for you to even express that it is not, it's incoherent, isn't it? It makes no sense. And yet that is what Stonewall has been telling us. That is what, ever since 2015, when they changed from same sex to same gender, that is what Stonewall has been telling us. And that is what all the LGBTQIA plus organizations around the world have been telling us.
That's right.
And that's why I really hope that this is a victory for what is sometimes called Turf Island, sometimes affectionately and sometimes as an insult. I'm really pleased that news media around the world, in France and in America, around the world, are taking note of this, because this needs to be rowed back everywhere, not just in the UK, and all tribute to For Women Scotland for fighting this fight and allowing us to intervene on behalf of lesbian rights.
Bev, thank you. Always a pleasure to have you on. Bev Jackson, co-founder of the LGB Alliance. Let's talk to Peter Tatchell, human rights activist, director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation. Peter, good afternoon to you. Well, I think you've probably been listening to what Bev said. I'm going to take a bit of a punt here that there's quite a lot you would disagree with. Good afternoon.
Okay, now get ready for Peter Tatchell. Now, I have discussed Peter Tatchell on a number of occasions. Peter Tatchell has a very spotty history. I think that that's the kindest and most diplomatic way of putting it. Peter Tatchell has written quite a few essays on, for example, some very, very brutal manhood rituals among certain tribes, where he has concluded that grown men preying on young boys, no matter what you call it, if you call it a manhood ritual, whatever you call it, does not seem to harm the boys long term. Peter Tatchell is also a very, very dishonest individual. And that makes me sad, because Peter Tatchell is also one of the few gay campaigners who has not just focused on his country of birth, but has taken a look at countries overseas and their and the terrible anti-gay laws that have been passed in a number of different places. Would that the gay organizations were equally interested in protecting and defending their gay brothers and sisters in places like Russia, Uganda, etc. But they're not. They're not interested, because they found this cash cow, which is transgenderism, and they put all of their eggs in that basket, and they basically abandoned the gay community, which is very, very sad. But let's hear what he has to say.
Afternoon.
Well, good afternoon, Ian and listeners. First of all, let me start by saying that biological sex is real, and so is gender identity. They're two different things. They're not the same, but they're both equally valid. And in a democratic liberal society, we have to try and find a way of reconciling them to avoid some of the instances that Bev has spoken about. As far as I'm aware, there's never been any court judgment in this country to compel a lesbian to have sex with a trans woman.
Okay, and that is where he lost me. That is where he lost me. This is one of the most strawy of straw man arguments I think I have ever heard him present to anything. Nobody has ever said that there has been a court verdict forcing lesbians to have sex with biological males. That is not what the fucking issue is, Peter. That is not the issue. Oh my God, he is so infuriating. You know, he gets certain things so right. And then here he is trying to find a way to stuff the toothpaste back in the tube. It is maddening.
To date a trans woman. That isn't, and I'm sure there have been a few examples where a trans woman has tried to date a lesbian, but of course, a lesbian is perfectly within her rights to refuse to date a
But
trans
it doesn't
woman.
make you, I think the point there with Bev was that it doesn't make you a wicked transphobe if you say, well, I'm never ever going to, like, I'm never going to date a trans woman. That's not going to happen. And I can say that. I can say that without being a transphobic son of a gun, can't I?
Absolutely. I have never supported those who say that lesbians must date trans women. That is completely wrong.
Okay.
Really?
Lesbians have every right to refuse to date a person of any kind. No one should be forced to date anyone.
True.
And I think this is a bit of a mountain out of a molehill, because, as I say,
Is it?
the courts have never ruled that lesbians must date trans women, and all the lesbians I know, when they've been approached by trans women, they've politely said no, thank you, and the trans woman has accepted that and said okay.
Bullshit. Absolute fucking bullshit. Absolute bullshit. Please, why don't you gaslight lesbians more and tell them that their attempts to have private lesbian-only spaces have not been invaded by men. Please tell me that lesbian dating apps haven't been overrun with men who are trying to get into the pants of lesbians. Please tell me that lesbians have not consistently been targeted by activists and told that they must allow these men into their private spaces, and that if they do not agree to open their minds, let's say, to the possibility of dating a trans woman, that they are bigots. It happens all the fucking time, and it doesn't just happen in the UK. It happens all over the Western world. We've seen this. It's gotten particularly bad in Australia, but in the UK, absolutely, Peter. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? Yes, and getting in the pants of a lesbian is a long-running straight male fantasy. You know, we've seen it over and over and over again. It is such a cliche, it's almost boring at this point. But these men with their gender identity certificates, or just by standing up and saying, I am a woman, have found a neat end run around the objections of lesbians who have said over and over and over again, if I fire up a lesbian dating app, I only want to see women. I do not want to see men. And they have routinely been shut down. Routinely. The same thing with lesbian-only spaces. Peter, where have you been? Have you missed all this?
So it's a bit of a mountain out of a molehill. But on the wider issue, this judgment, my understanding is that it will not prevent organizations from choosing to accept trans women if they wish to. So, for example, I have a friend who works for a women's centre in the north of England. For the last, I think, 7 years now, by the agreement of the staff and the users, they have accepted trans women and they've never had a problem. It's a happy centre where everybody is welcome and it's trans inclusive. The law won't force them to deny trans women, providing no one objects. But of course, if someone does object, then the centre told me they would have to change their policy.
And there's clearly always going to be people with different views. You know, we're a healthy democracy, Peter, and, you know, not everybody is always on the same page with every sinew of a judgment. But broadly speaking, something like a woman's refuse, there would be, you might imagine, you know, a lot of people would say, hang on, this is for women, not for blokes. And of course, this judgment does very much say that a trans woman is not a woman.
Right.
But
Therefore,
it also says now that trans men must use women's toilets. And that's going to cause incredible distress to women when they go to a toilet thinking it's for them and suddenly a trans man walks in. Imagine the shock, discomfort and fear that some of those women might feel.
Oh, so now he suddenly cares about how women feel in bathrooms. This is new. This is not something that I've heard him express before. It's for the wrong reason, of course. But okay.
Yeah, I genuinely asked that. Yeah, I genuinely asked that question because I was never, you know, I've never been able to work that out. And just to go over what I said a little earlier, Peter, you know, I've done this job for a long time, as you know, and this was never ever a debate. It was never a discussion. It wasn't on the agenda. It suddenly appeared out of nowhere, it seems. And I've often wondered where or how it came around. And it seems to me that, yes, of course, there are trans people who will have felt discriminated against over the years, but this has been a political thing, hasn't it? This hasn't really come from people who genuinely feel I'm in the wrong body, I need to live my life differently. This has come from, you know, the identitarian Marxist left, if you like, who've gone in hard on this. You can be whoever you want to be. You want to call yourself, if you've got a penis and a beard and you want to call yourself a woman, you've got every right to do that. And the rest of the world should bend over backwards to accommodate it.
No, that's not true or fair, Ian. The call for trans inclusion has come from trans people themselves who've been marginalised and discriminated against. and that is wrong. This judgment, of course, also says that trans people will continue to be protected under the Equality Act against discrimination, but it will allow, in certain circumstances, same-sex, women-only spaces to be preserved. Now, it's a difficult issue. The other issue, of course...
It is not a difficult issue at all. It's not a difficult issue. It's very, very clear. Women's spaces for women. Biological women. Period. The fucking end. Okay? I mean, what are we talking about here? It's not a difficult issue. And I'm wondering how this ruling is going to affect men in women's prisons going forward. I'm wondering how this ruling is going to affect women or men trying to get into women's sports in the UK. I'm wondering about a lot of things. I wonder how far-reaching this verdict will be and to what extent it will change what is happening in the UK and what has been happening for the past decade. But it's just so satisfying to hear a judge say, in essence, a woman is an adult human female, the end.
Is when it comes to biology isn't simple. A trans woman who undertakes hormone treatment and gender reassignment will have many of the attributes of a biological woman. The hormone treatment will actually change their physiology.
But she'll never be a biological woman, though, will she?
It will change their, reduce their muscle mass, reduce their strength.
Will it change their chromosomes, Peter?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It won't change their chromosomes.
So they remain a man.
Biology is not a simply, black and white, cut and dried issue. It is complex. And unfortunately, we're in a situation where this judgment has ruled in one direction, and that will mean for many trans people a great deal of anxiety.
Why is it that biology has only become complex in the last 10 years? Why is that? I'm sorry, but there is no amount of hormone therapy, there is no amount of surgery, there are not enough wigs that you can buy or makeup that you can buy or women's clothing that you can buy that will turn a man into a woman. Period. Now, I can say that without being transphobic. I am stating an actual biological reality. And I know that biological reality is something that a great many people refuse to acknowledge. I would guess that if a person who passes, a Buck Angel, a Blair White, or someone like that were to walk into the bathroom that does not correspond with the sex that they were born into, I don't think that they would really draw a lot of attention. It is when men who stand up and declare themselves to be women without making any effort to transition, none, but who just march into women's spaces, or even, let's say, Leah Thomas. Let's say Leah Thomas. Leah Thomas went through hormone therapy, and Leah Thomas is still a man. Still a man. Now, I did not see Riley Gaines's presser earlier, but I am looking forward to watching it. And for every Leah Thomas, there are so many other examples. You are not female. You are not female. And for us to continue to, let's say, try to enable these delusions that these men have, whether they're AGPs, whether they're cross-dressers, whatever they are, is not doing anyone any favors, especially women. Especially women, because enough is fucking enough. It's not just a matter of men invading women's spaces. It's a matter of getting language changed to ease the feelings of these men. It's a matter of really leaning into the delusion that has done no one any favors. No one. Least of all, may I add, least of all actual transgender people who just want to live in peace and want to be left alone. These activists have done nothing but create a terrible environment for regular, normal, garden variety transgender people. So, hooray for you.
I think and hope that most organizations will respond in a measured way, and will, perhaps we can find new solutions. For example, on the issue of toilets, if we have more gender neutral toilets, like you have at a pop concert or a festival, the toilets there, they're male and female, they're gender neutral. Well, more institutions could have gender neutral toilets, and that might solve that problem. And then in terms of trans participation or involvement or attendance or ability to access women-only spaces, perhaps some organizations might now make new trans-inclusive spaces available for trans people.
That would be
right. But when that option was offered, when the option was offered to allow, for example, trans athletes to compete against one another, they had no takers. They had no takers because these trans women, these men, absolutely want to compete against women. They want to compete against women. So if we could come up with some kind of a compromise, that would be great. But it seems like the activists are completely unwilling to compromise on any matter, on any issue. And again, I am not talking about normal, everyday garden variety trans people who just want to be left in peace and live their lives. I'm talking about the activists. The activists. Anyway.
Separate is not equal. Separate is not desirable. But that may be a solution.
Okay. Well, people have their own views on where you draw a line, as in things like participating in sport, etc. But that maybe is an argument for another day. Meantime, Peter, thank you. Peter Tatchell. He is, of course, human rights activist and director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation.
Okay, Peter. Well, I've got another video. I've got Helen Joyce taking a victory lap. Helen Joyce and Michael Ferran. Let's hear what they had to say. Helen Joyce, who is such a tireless campaigner, and God bless her. All right, let's continue.
By lawyers for years on the other side that if the government says sex means a piece of paper, then sex means a piece of paper. Well, the judges said they were wrong and we were right.
Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. Today, the Supreme Court has issued a judgment in the case between For Women Scotland and Scottish ministers, saying that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act refer to biological sex.
The unanimous decision of this court is that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex.
We are lesbians and we rule.
What does this mean for women's rights groups that have been campaigning on this issue, and what does it mean for women's rights going forward? I'm Lucy Dunn, and today I'm joined by Michael Ferran, a lawyer and lecturer at the University of Glasgow, and Helen Joyce, an author and a women's rights campaigner. Could you tell us a bit about what that judgment is and what it means?
So the case was predominantly about the question of what sex means in our anti-discrimination law. And the challenge that was being brought by For Women Scotland was arguing that sex is a biological term, and therefore all references to sex in anti-discrimination law, including references to lesbians or pregnant mothers, relate to biological categories rather than legal or certificated categories. And the judgment today has upheld that ruling, or upheld that argument, resoundingly. The Supreme Court has completely vindicated the arguments of both For Women Scotland and several interveners, Sex Matters being one, and then also the lesbian interveners as well. So this seems to me to be a pretty resounding win for those organisations.
And Helen, you've written a lot about women's rights before. How did this make you feel when you heard the judgment today?
I mean, vindicated, but also just amazed because, I work for Sex Matters and we were one of the interveners. We were very, very proud to be called on to make oral submissions in support of For Women Scotland, who are our friends and who we've worked with for years on these topics. And we've watched them fight their own government through successive courts. And, to be, first of all, to be able to talk to the Supreme Court, to put our submissions and then to see our arguments repeated in the judgment, we are on the other side from the Scottish government. Implicitly, the UK government argued against the position that we took. Amnesty International intervened on the other side.
Amnesty International intervened on the other side. Amnesty fucking International. You see why I'm so salty? All these groups that I used to donate to, all these groups that I used to admire, Amnesty International, which has such a stellar brand, Amnesty International that has done so much great work in terms of releasing people who have been imprisoned for political reasons. Amnesty International that has lost its way, much like the ACLU, much like the Human Rights Watch, much like so many of these other NGOs. It is absolutely incredible that Amnesty fucking International would stick its nose into this case. One would think that with so many people being wrongfully imprisoned around the globe by terrible, despotic regimes, that they would have their plate full trying to intervene on behalf of those people who desperately need their help. And yet here is Amnesty intervening in this case where they are not needed. It's all such a shameless, cynical cash grab and so depressing to watch. It's been depressing to watch.
The Equality and Human Rights Commission, which is the regulator for equalities law, they intervened on the other side. All those well-paid people, all those lawyers, all those people who have lost sight of reality and who thought that the words are more important than the reality, that the possession of a piece of paper is what makes people man or woman, male or female, not the actual immutable physical reality of being mammals, they were all wrong, it turns out. Women who said it's a real thing to be a woman, and when you're discriminated against because you're a woman, it's because you're physically, biologically a woman. It's not because of your piece of paper. We've been told by lawyers for years on the other side that if the government says sex means a piece of paper, then sex means a piece of paper. Well, the judges said they were wrong and we were right.
And as you say, it's been quite a long-standing battle in many ways for women's rights campaigners. I think it was last November that For Women Scotland didn't have quite the same outcome with the Scottish courts. Can you talk us through a little bit more just how we've got to where we are just now?
I mean, the Gender Recognition Act 2004 was the first time that the government started to allow people to change the sex on their birth certs. And in case anyone's confused about this, you actually can't change your sex. It's not possible.
No, you can't.
It can't be done. So that was called a legal fiction. And then in 2010, the Equality Act was passed, and it wrapped up a whole load of other anti-discrimination laws, the Sex Discrimination Act 1975, the Race Discrimination Act, discrimination against disabled people, etc. And careless drafting between the two of them made all the lawyers who think that paper is more important than material reality think that the categories of man and woman, male and female in that Equality Act referred to the pieces of paper. So women who noticed that at the time have been arguing about this for a long time. But For Women Scotland have been arguing for years. Their own government is absolutely all in on the idea that you can change the piece of paper and that changes reality.
That's right.
And they actually passed a Gender Recognition Reform Act that was stayed by the Westminster government. But they've been taking cases on this for years, successively in Scotland, and then they arrive at the Supreme Court. And the judgment went against them in Scotland. But now the best legal minds in the country have agreed with us. Isn't that nice?
And Michael, on that legal note, I suppose you've mentioned the Equality Act and also the Gender Reform Bill that passed through Scottish Parliament. Can you tell us a little bit what this means, this judgment today, about the law, both the Equality Act and the Gender Bill?
So, I mean, I suppose the first thing to say about that is that there's no legal effect on the gender recognition reform bill from this judgment alone. So it is open to the Scottish Government to reintroduce that bill into the Scottish Parliament. And then if the Scottish Parliament chooses to vote in favour of that bill again, there would then be a question as to whether or not the UK government would like to issue another Section 35 order to prevent that bill from getting royal assent. My view is if all of those political contingencies occur, this ruling means that the dominant argument in favour of why the gender recognition reform bill could be blocked by the UK government, i.e. the fact that self-ID legislation, a change to the Gender Recognition Act, would modify adversely the operation of our anti-discrimination law, well, the reasons for that kind of fall away now, because the Supreme Court has said that the Gender Recognition Act is a piece of legislation that enshrines an entitlement to get a change to your birth certificate, but it doesn't affect the operation of anti-discrimination law, single-sex spaces, sport, things like that. And a lot of the adverse effects that had been put forward by the UK government to justify blocking the bill were because of the interaction between the Gender Recognition Act and the Equality Act. So if all of those political contingencies were to occur, and I'm not sure they necessarily would, there would be a harder legal argument for the UK government to rely on to block a gender recognition reform bill again, because the bill would effectively simply be legislation relating to certificates that people can have privately, but which don't affect the way they interact with the world or how they interact with our protections in law for single-sex spaces or sport or things like that.
And I suppose thinking more about what this actually means in sort of real life, we've seen the Sandy Peggy case in Scotland really take hold in the last couple of months against NHS Fife, in which a Scottish nurse has spoken to her employers about how she felt discriminated against after she raised concerns about sharing a changing room with a trans woman. You know, how does the judgment today affect cases like that going forwards?
So those cases we would have argued, and we did argue in support of Sandy Peggy, the law was always being misinterpreted anyway. The law is overly complex the way that it was written. So the main thing that's happened today is that it's really simplified it.
Good.
It used to be possible to keep out trans women who didn't have certificates saying they were women because they're just men legally. It was also possible to keep out trans women who did have certificates via another different legal route. But you got to the same end point. But nobody understood the law properly. It was complex. The EHRC did not give clear guidance on it. And organisations like Stonewall had really consistently misrepresented the law. So people like NHS Fife seriously thought that they were doing the right thing, telling a woman that objecting to having a man changing her sharing room. And to be clear now, the doctor in question is a man legally as well as physically. He doesn't have a gender recognition certificate.
Well, there you go.
So it doesn't affect it directly. What it does is it just clarifies the law so much that now we can go back to people who said that self-ID was the law, which it never was, and say to them, look, you've really got this wrong. The one group which it would have affected the law for, the big group that it would have affected the law for, is lesbians. Because the way that the law worked, this thing that I said that there were two different routes to keep men out of women-only spaces, that doesn't hold for associations. It held for single-sex spaces, it held for sports. It didn't hold for associations. So if the judgment had gone the wrong way today, an association of lesbians would have had to admit a heterosexual man who had a piece of paper saying he was a woman. I mean, that was actually a big part of why the Supreme Court ruled the way they did, because that's obviously not just outrageous, it's a destruction of the human rights of lesbians.
Jesus Christ. You know, again, I am going to say yet again, just for the people in the back, can we please, I'm asking nicely, can we please just leave lesbians alone to do their thing? Can we please allow lesbians to have privacy, to have their own spaces, to only have to interact with other women, lesbian or not? Can we please allow gay men their spaces in which to be gay men? Can we please stop with this nonsense? Can we please stop trying to invade these spaces that are designated for gay men, for lesbian women, And can we please stop referring to the LGB Alliance as a hate, I hiccuped, as a hate group? Can we please stop doing that? Someone had to step forward and represent the interests of gay men and gay women. Someone had to do it. The LGB Alliance is not a hate group. The LGB Alliance represents the interests of gay men and gay women only. And it is entirely their right to do so. And thank God somebody's doing it, because, we know that the gay press has been co-opted. We know that Stonewall has been co-opted. All these gay organizations, the Human Rights Campaign, all of them have been co-opted. And we seem to have drifted away from why it is that gay people need their own spaces. And why don't we respect that boundary? It's enough. It's fucking enough of these delusions and this craziness. So let's continue.
Because they, like everybody else, have freedom of association.
And I suppose looking at the politics side of things as well.
Hi, Julie.
You work in Scotland, Michael, and I suppose it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on whether you think, I suppose, leading up to the 2026 Hollywood elections, whether the Scottish Government will try and have another look at the legislation that they had tried to push through under Nicola Sturgeon, whether that be in their interests, and kind of what the atmosphere maybe is north of the border about the sort of priority that gender identity has now on the list of people's priorities when they do look towards who they want to vote in next time.
I mean, I think that's a great question. It's slightly outside of my area of expertise, so I'm kind of just giving you some generic thoughts here. But my understanding is that, up until the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, there was basically one political question in Scotland, which was independence.
Exactly.
Which side did you fall one way or the other on independence? And thanks to grassroots feminist organisations like Forum in Scotland, the political dial in Scotland shifted in the run-up to and in the aftermath of the Gender Recognition Reform Bill coming through the Scottish Parliament. And at that point then you had two political questions that were relevant, and one of them relating to sex and gender identity was not popular. At least the position that was coming from the Scottish government was not popular. The way in which this could go forward, I think, is kind of split in two lines. The Scottish government and the politicians in Scotland might look at this and say, this is a really contentious topic that we were on the wrong side of, so we should drop it and pretend it never happened and hope everybody else pretends it never happened. Or they could say this is an issue of Scottish nationalism and the kind of sovereignty of the Scottish Parliament, and this was legislation that was passed by the Scottish Parliament that was blocked by the UK government as a result of our constitutional settlement that many people in the Scottish Parliament disagree with, and they might see this as an opportunity to revive the politics around the Scottish Parliament.
Yeah, but the problem is, first of all, I to this day, I am still baffled as to why Nicola Sturgeon would pick that hill to die on, as well as her successor, Hamza Yusuf. I don't get it. And then to have Westminster basically block all of that shit. And for a woman or a man or whomever running a political party that is basically founded to promote Scottish independence, okay, to then not be able to make hay out of the situation because what was contained in that legislation was so deeply unpopular in Scotland. I have never seen, well, let me see if I've never seen it. I may have seen another example, but I just can't think of one off the top of my head, of a political party committing suicide the way that Nicola Sturgeon's party did, by doubling, tripling, quadrupling, and quintupling down on this matter. I simply do not get it. And I heard a lot of theories like, well, the SNP is trying to attract young voters. Well, did it work? I don't think it worked. Okay, so why is it? I mean, it was just another example of an elected government going completely against the will of the people who voted them in. It is absolutely astonishing. And look at where Nicola Sturgeon ended up.
My own view is that that's a pretty difficult political decision that will have to be made, because it's not as if the Scottish Parliament had been blocked from enacting legislation that was wildly popular in Scotland. And I think that then, generates the kind of tension that you might have between the two major political questions in Scotland right now.
One thing they will be looking at is they've just been really roundly defeated. Is it really what you want to do, to pick a fight with people who have just won so comprehensively?
Right.
Because if they do this, women will just keep fighting. It's too important. It's existential for women that we can have the protections we need in law.
And I suppose that sort of comes back to what Michael was saying about the shift of a political dial. And I suppose maybe now looking at what political party leaders are saying on this subject, it does feel as though there has been movement, even in the last 12 months, about just where party leaders like Keir Starmer of Labour and John Swinney even himself want to stand on the issue. And to my mind, it seems it's only the sort of Scottish Greens really that are left really campaigning, against what women's rights campaigners are saying. Is that something that you've picked up in terms of just how that has been shifting?
Completely, it's been shifting. But what you've seen is a lot of people arriving at a totally untenable point, like the Keir Starmer line of 99.9% of women don't have penises. Keir, it's 100%.
Exactly.
It's just ridiculous. Like when a sentence like that comes out of your mouth, you know you've got it wrong.
Yep.
And now the Supreme Court justices have said they got it wrong. So, somebody like Keir Starmer, who's a very clever lawyer, he obviously was ignoring the sort of common sense view, the view that women said, look, really no men. He might listen to the Supreme Court justices, and I think he'd be quite grateful, because that was a stupid line, and it was a very unpopular line.
It was ridiculous.
And, if you're willing to say that any women have penises, in literally every interview, someone is going to say, how many is it now? Are we down to 1 in 1,000?
Right.
Like, wouldn't you love to have an excuse to give up this nonsense? So one thing the Supreme Court has done today is it's given all the politicians who thought this is a very complex issue, there's faults on both sides, we need to take the heat out of it, all those things, it's given them an excuse to just say the Supreme Court has spoken.
And Michael, just going forward, do you think, we talked about clarifying the Equality Act and just getting that bit more sort of understanding of what exactly the law means. Is there more that can be done on this, or are we kind of at a really good point just now?
I mean, it looks to me, I'll caveat that I've not had an opportunity to read the full judgment yet. I've just, I was in the court, I was able to see the decision being handed down, and I've seen the summary. But this strikes me as, a piercing light of clarity through a lot of heat that has been coming and that has been thrown around in the political discourse around this topic. I mean, 2 points that I would say that I think are important to mention about this judgment. The first is that the conclusion the court came to was as a result of a very complicated legal argument about statutory interpretation. The justices did not take a straight down the line political assessment of what they think would be a good thing for politics, and they were clear when they were handing this down that this was complex statutory interpretation.
It is absolutely absurd that any of this had to be litigated in a court of law. It just shows you how crazy the times are that we're living in. I'm going to pull this down. I want to take a look at what Riley Gaines said, since it's been recommended to me in chat. So let's hear what Riley Gaines had to say today. I see she's at DOJ with the Attorney General. So let's hear what she had to say.
Well, goodness gracious, it's an honor to be here, to stand beside, of course, Secretary McMahon, Attorney General Bondi, these amazingly brave athletes, Representative Libby. But truthfully, I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated that we have to be here, that we as women have to stand before you all on national television demanding equal opportunities, demanding privacy in areas of undressing, demanding safety in our sports. Amazing to me that we are still here fighting this fight, that the Democratic Party has really doubled down, tripled down, quadrupled down on their ridiculous stance, but that's exactly what they've done. Let me tell you what sports has done in my life. Of course, in terms of athletic achievement, I very proudly finished my career as a 12-time NCAA All-American, a 5-time SEC champion, actually the SEC record holder in the 200 butterfly, making me one of the fastest Americans of all time. A 2-time Olympic trial qualifier, SEC Scholar Athlete of the Year, SEC Community Service Leader of the Year. The list goes on, but again, just to really reiterate, It's a lifelong journey. It's how I met my husband. It's what gave me my lifelong friends. It taught me how to be a leader. It taught me how to set goals and work to achieve those goals. All things that, of course, I'm utilizing in my life now beyond sports. That leadership in Maine, Governor Mills, Democratic leadership really across the nation, that's what they're denying girls and women of. I'm sure you guys saw the clips and the visuals that surfaced following President Trump's executive order signing of this EO, barring men from participating in women's sports within any educational program that receives federal funding. And it was the most amazing thing to be there. And you have all of these young girls. I'm talking 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. They've got their jerseys on, their sports uniforms, their big bows in their hair that they wear on the soccer field. That visual means more to me than I could possibly put into words. And that is what is at stake here.
That visual, and I said it at the time, and I'll repeat it now. You cannot buy that kind of publicity for $1 million, $2 million, $10 million. There is no price that you can put on that visual of Trump signing that executive order with all those little girls standing around him. It was absolutely incredible. And it was, again, like I said about this verdict, it was absolutely incredible that we had to reach a point where the president of the fucking United States had to sit down, put pen to paper, and sign an executive order that was so intuitive in every possible way. And the fact that he's getting so much pushback from these governors, from these universities. I mean, the NCAA caved immediately. But now you have Maine putting up a fight. And again, it makes me think that a lot of these people, these leaders, Democratic leaders, have not yet gotten the memo. And I don't know how much more clearly the American public could put it. This is an 80-20 split. 80 against allowing men and women's sports. The country does not agree on a goddamn thing, except for this, apparently. And they still absolutely refuse to face reality. And if you don't want to face, let's say, biological reality, sports reality, whatever, how about political survival reality? Still haven't gotten around to that point. It's incredible to me. Let's continue.
That is who Governor Mills is fighting, not Donald Trump. It's those little girls. And I believe that's sick. It's regressive is what it is. They do this under the guise of progress, indicating we are moving in the positive forward direction. No, what Governor Mills is doing, and again, Democratic governors across the nation, is deeply regressive and utterly misogynistic. Over the past 3 years, I've had the opportunity to speak to countless girls in Maine and again across the country, countless parents, coaches who all virtually say the same thing. Why wouldn't anyone protect my athlete? Why wouldn't anyone protect my daughter? Why wouldn't anyone protect me? I've talked to girls who have lost roster spots, of course, podium finishes. I've talked to girls who have been exploited and simultaneously exposed to naked men in intimate areas of undressing. I've talked to girls who have been severely injured in their sports due to a male player on the opposing team. For crying out loud, we have a female representative from Maine, Laura Libby, you just heard from her. She didn't tell you what happened to her. She lost her ability to vote and to speak on the House floor for defending girls and women, for posting about what was happening in Maine. No, this type of oppression didn't happen in Afghanistan. No, this type of censorship didn't happen in England. It happened right here in America under Democratic leadership. Again, this isn't progress.
No, it isn't.
I would describe this as betrayal. Let this be a notice, these actions that we have seen put forward today by the Department of Justice, by the Department of Education, to all other states who are not willing to comply with federal law, that federal law being Title IX, which is very clear in how it was originally implemented, or at least it should be. We never knew we had to define this word sex until these both elected and unelected bureaucrats started to go through the back door and reinterpret this word to mean what they want it to mean. Originally implemented in 1972, it was only 37 words, very brief.
Right.
Ultimately, of course, preventing sex-based discrimination. Let this be a notice. California, Minnesota, the likes thereof. If you do not comply with federal law, you do not get to reap the benefits of complying with federal law. Of course, one of those benefits being receiving federal funds.
Right.
Women are protected and recognized under federal law, again, that law being Title IX. The U.S. government under President Trump, including the Department of Justice, including the Department of Education, will not stand by and ignore when the federally protected rights of women and girls are being violated. Again, that encounter between Governor Mills and President Trump went viral for really all of the right reasons. I think she thought she had this mic drop moment when she said, "I'll see you in court." Guess what? You will, because President Trump is a man of his promises. That was his campaign slogan. That's what we've seen delivered. Promises made, promises kept. This is another one. People, the American people, girls, women, boys, men, old, young, white, black, gay, straight, none of those identity factors matter. We want transparency and we want accountability. Again, we voted overwhelmingly in favor of that on November 5th. And accountability is back in the White House. So I stand before you all today, and I thank you, again, Secretary McMahon, Attorney General Bondi. I thank you on behalf of course, myself, but I think more importantly, my younger sister, of all the women and girls who have dreams, like I did when I was young, to achieve, to succeed in my sport and beyond. So thank you.
And, I would like to say that, there's been a lot of talk about Title IX for obvious reasons, because we're talking about men competing in women's sports. But one of the depressing things that I've noticed on Facebook among my friends, and just to be clear, the people that I am friends with on Facebook are people that I have known for decades. Some of them are people that I've known since kindergarten, elementary school, all throughout my school years. Professionally, I know them, I've worked with them, and I have been so astonished and so negatively affected, let's say, seeing their comments about federal funding being withheld from universities, from institutions of higher learning like Harvard, like Columbia, and so on, and cheering on Harvard being openly defiant and saying, "Fuck you, no, we won't do as you ask, and take your federal funding and shove it." Now, maybe they have an equal amount of money, if not more, in reserve that is going to be donated by Qatar or China or one of these other repressive governments. But I mean, I really don't have the strength these days to argue with these people. But I'm really concerned that there doesn't seem to be a correlation in the minds of these people between the federal funds being pulled and violations of Title VI on university campuses. Violating Title VI will result in federal funds being withheld from your institution of higher learning. And the fact that either these friends of mine who I've known, again, people who are very aware of what's going on, people who are very hip to the news and so on, the fact that people don't see what is going on these college campuses, or that they don't care because the aggression and the discrimination is being leveled at a group that way too many people think is a privileged group and therefore undeserving of protection or special protection, let's say. But Title VI doesn't make those distinctions, and I just don't understand how there is such a profound disconnect. And I get it, you hate Trump, whatever. I understand that, okay? But don't you see what has been happening on college campuses? Don't you get it? And don't you understand that there are going to be ramifications if you decide that you are going to violate Title VI, or you are going to allow the university to violate Title VI by allowing this behavior to continue, that you are going to lose your federal funding. Well, maybe it's time to dip into that hugely generous endowment that some of you have. Harvard's endowment is over $50 billion. I think that Harvard can survive quite easily without that federal funding. But I just don't get it. Like, why are you defending the agitators and the people with their violent rhetoric and the people who target Jews on campus? Why are you defending them? Why are you so against these people being deported when they have clearly violated the terms of their green cards, their student visas, and so on? I just don't understand it. And I know that these are not hateful people. I know that these are not bigots. And maybe it is that, you know, the fact that it's coming from Trump has allowed them to just lean into this position without thinking it through. But what an absolute fucking shame. What a shame. I don't know. It's been a very depressing time lately. Coming to terms with with this new normal. Yeah, I'm not a fan. Not a fan. But again, thank you, United Kingdom Supreme Court. Thank you for this great ruling. Thank you for giving us this cause for celebration. Thank you for allowing common sense to rule. I appreciate you. Women all over the world appreciate you. Those of us, even me, with my little microscopic contribution to this conversation, I am very, very grateful. And again, I want to thank you on behalf of Magdalene Burns. I'm just sorry that she didn't live long enough to see this day come. So anyway, thanks, guys. I appreciate all of you. And I will be back the next time with another topic. Thanks again, guys. And I appreciate all of you being here and chatting and participating. If you wouldn't mind subscribing on your way out if you haven't subbed yet. And I will see you guys the next time. See you later, guys.